should always be proximal to the joint, movable arm distal to the joint. The ones you guys have is essentially the same thing, but instead of having a flat part in which you place on the finger, you'll just place, you have the protractor sort of perpendicular, and then this is how you'll place this. So this being the stationary arm, and that being the movable arm. So if you want to measure, for instance, finger MCP flexion, so can you just make a face actually? So you place here, and that's how you measure. So I got about 80 degrees of MCP flexion here. So again, this is your goniometer right here, and you're placing the arm just like so.
How
So
do you,
that the protractor.
On the protractor it says that that's hyperflexion. So how do you?
Yeah, hyperflexion is when you want to measure. So can you go? Let's see if he can hyperextend. So he can't quite hyperextend as much as I do, but I'm just going to show on my own finger. You see how I grossly hyperextend my pen? I know it's gross. Yeah. So this is how you measure hyperextension. So you have a hyperextension component in which you can measure like that. So you're kind of measuring backwards. I have a different feeling about this.
It's to her point though, his 0 starts there.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's where this is adding confusion on this one, because it's just, you've always got to line it up at 0.
Hyperextension would be here, wouldn't it? Let me think I'm not used to this one myself. You need everything that we said so far. So you will get, again, for this, the protractor, it is a little awkward, I do have to say, this goniometer. We'll make sure that next year, when we make it available, we'll try to get the other plastic ones, because I think they're about the same price. Not sure why we got this year. Can you get that blue towel for me, please? It's just to add contrast. Is that better?
Good.
The whiteboard.
There you go.
There.
So the movable arm, the stationary arm is always the one with the protractor. Still, it's awkward because there's no arm attached to the protractor on your finger ones, okay? But for the hyperextension, my friend over there, kudos for him, not for me. He talked about placing it here, because then you get into the hyperextension component, so here. The other ones we used to, I know it's gross, sorry. The ones we used to have, can you help me here? Can you hold it like this? Thank you. So something like that.
Yes.
That's how you would measure. I know it's very gross, I agree.
Jeez, it's broken.
Okay? And then for flexion, so my PIP would go from, when you're recording, it would go from plus 20 to then, can you be the therapist? Thank you. to about 100.
Yeah.
So that's my PIP flexion, and that's my PIP extension, and then this is for the hyperextension component here. Like that. Got it? Okay. So can you try and bring your all the way? So he hyperextends through the MCP joint. So you're placing it like this: stationary arm, proximal, movable arm, distal. And can you make a fist now? So he goes from about plus 20 to about 90 degrees, like this. Okay? There you go. So just like that. PIP, same thing. Can you extend? So he hyperextends a little bit. So he hyperextends to about 15 degrees. And can you flex the PIP joint? So bend the PIP joint as best as you can. Like that. The same thing for DIP joint. For your thumb, I can't remember exactly how they textbook does, because I do it slightly different from the text. Does anybody have a textbook here?
I do.
Back stationary arm proximal to the joint, movable arm distal to the joint. So can you extend your thumb? You'll bring your thumb out. So he hyperextends a little bit. Do it that way. And then can you try and touch here? So bend your thumb in. So measuring MCP joint. And the same thing for IP joint. For CMC joint, I do have to remind myself, because I don't measure like your textbook in my practice. So here, for the CMC joint, for CMC flexion, you're placing the goniometer. So stationary arm parallel to the longitudinal axis of the radius. So here, sorry, the other way. Stationary arm parallel to the axis of rotation. Axis right on the CMC joint, and then the movable arm on the dorsal of the first metacarpal, and then you ask your client to flex. So flex your thumb down, and you're getting that measurement. Do you see that? So relax your thumb for a second.
Do it again.
So this is the relaxed position. Stationary arm parallel to the radius, axis right on the joint, movable arm on the dorsum of the first metacarpal. You are in front of everybody else, my dear. Perfect, thank you. And then curl your thumb to touch here. Down like this. Got it? And then thumb, CMC extension. Parallel arm, one arm, longitudinal axis of the radius. Now you put the protractor on the other side. And then the other arm, so just relax your hand. So you get your client or patient to relax their hand. So movable arm parallel to the axis of rotation of the radius. And then you're already starting on an angle, as you can see. Can you see that, how you started? Because naturally, your thumb doesn't sit like this. Your thumb sits on an angle. We explained that, remember? This is what makes us different from monkeys. Monkeys have thumbs like this, whereas human beings have thumb in about 90 degrees in relation to the main plane of the hand. So when you're placing these axes on the CMC joint, stationary arm lined up with the radius, movable arm lined up with the first metacarpal, just like that. And there's a little glare, like this. So now can you bring your thumb as if you're hitchhiking? Thumb up, and then you move, and that's the measurement. So you're starting already, when I'm starting with him, he's already starting at about 25. So he goes from 25 to, can you move up again? To about 50. So he has 25 degrees of CMC extension. Okay? And then for the wrist, the ones that we showed, you're measuring on here, correct? On this side here. Yours, the easiest way is to actually put on the outer border of the wrist, so here. It might be better to do this hand.
Down.
Can you move the camera
Yep.
up a bit?
On your arm down.
That?
You want to be like that. Yeah. Good thing we don't work in Hollywood, Las Vegas. Sorry, LA.
Why?
I guess we wouldn't get a job. Yeah. Okay, so movable arm, stationary arm lined up with the ulna here. You'll find the axis of rotation. Remember, the axis of rotation for the wrist joint sort of moves as the movement's happening. So just move your patient back and forth. Think about the monkey bar. So his axis of rotation, as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of around here, isn't it not? Everybody agree with me? Yeah. Kind of here. That's where you put the axis, right there. And then can you bring your wrist back? As far back as you can. And as you see, it's already moving a little bit. Can you zoom in a little bit more, kind of here? Then people will see.
Just
And you
rotate.
turn. Oops. More. And then up. Perfect. Thank you. So axis, we kind of figured that would be there, but as you see, it changes a little bit. So you shift just like you do with your shoulder. You stay in that awkward position. If you have a shoulder problem, go see one of the doctors. I'll give the name after. So bring your shoulder, your wrist back. And then you get that. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And then flexion. So you have to move again. You need to shift a little bit your axis. That lined up with the ulna, the movable arm lined up with the fifth metacarpal, and axis where you kind of figured the axis would be. So here. Okay? Radial and ulnar deviation, same thing. So movable arm lined up with the midline of the forearm, stationary arm. Movable arm lined up with the third metacarpal axis where your axis should roughly be. Would you agree with me? It's kind of roughly right around here. Place that. Move towards your little finger. Make sure you're not lining up with the finger. You're actually doing with the third metacarpal, otherwise you get the wrong measurement. It has about 30 degrees of ulnar deviation, and then can you go into radial deviation, please? And then he has about 20 degrees. You're very flexible. So yeah, here's good. So when he does supination, he will line up the movable arm. So your stationary arm is perpendicular to the floor, correct? And then you'll get the most part of the movable arm touching the front part or the volar part of his wrist. And then this is, you put the protractor basically touching his wrist on the ulnar side, just like that. Simple? And then for pronation, elbow tucked in, so no cheating allowed, thank you. Again, on the ulnar border, stationary arm perpendicular to the floor, protractor touching his ulnar wrist, and then the movable arm on the dorsum of his wrist, touching as much as possible the back of his wrist. Simple, isn't it? Simple? The only difference is that Daisy had half protractor, so instead of, you're actually touching the arm on the skin. That's the only difference. But basically, if you really see, there's no difference. A measurement that I'm taking here is about 80 degrees. And it's 80 degrees here, roughly, as well. Like between 70, he has between 75 and 80. So that's the only difference. Can you see that difference? Difference here. Difference here. Got it? Everybody okay?